Welcome to Crazy HOA Moments. This one escalated fast in the front yard. The contractor truck idled at the curb, and Nancy yelled that she would blacklist the contractor if he touched another board. "I will make sure the vendor sees this," she screamed, her metal tape measure with a bright red latch snapping open like she was cracking a whip. The crew behind me had already unloaded half the fence panels, and now they were looking at each other, wondering if this job was about to explode. Nancy Anderson, Rules Interpretation Chair for the Ridgeview Estates Fence Compliance Association, stood in the middle of my property line with her pink windbreaker flapping in the wind and her scarf whipping around like a battle flag. This is Sioux Falls, South Dakota, where a missing survey stake can turn into a neighborhood scandal, and I work as a shipping clerk who keeps receipts, signatures, and tracking numbers for a living. That habit was about to save me, because Nancy had just kicked off a fence war that would cost her everything. My landlord had given me 60 days to finish repairs or face lease termination, and Nancy was threatening to tow the contractor truck within the hour, and the crew was ready to walk. Nancy snapped that tape measure again and jabbed it toward the fence line. "You are 6 inches over the setback, and I already sent the notice," she said. "I have all day, and so does my fine meter." The contractor foreman looked at me and shook his head. "Man, I have dealt with HOA stuff before, but this is next level. She already called me twice this morning saying she would pull my permit and report me to the city if I started work." I stayed calm, pulled out my phone, and opened the camera app, holding it chest high so she could see the red recording light. I said, "Nancy, the survey was filed with the county last month and the setback is correct. You can check the plat yourself." She stepped closer, her visor casting a shadow over her face, and said, "I can put you on the agenda and keep you there." That line landed like a threat, and I filed it away for later. Behind her, a passerby on the sidewalk slowed down, holding up a phone with the screen turned away, clearly recording the whole scene. Nancy did not notice. She was too busy waving a folded paper at me, which turned out to be a fence violation notice that reads like a ransom note with a deadline that makes no sense. The notice said I had 72 hours to remove all materials or face a $100 daily fine effective immediately, even though I had submitted my fence plan to the Architectural Review Committee 6 weeks earlier and never received a response. I kept recording and said, "Nancy, I filed the fence application on March 10th. Your committee has 45 days to respond under the covenants. That deadline passed last week." She smiled, cold and sharp, and said, "The covenants do not say we approve by silence. If we do not respond, you wait." I felt my jaw tighten, but I did not argue. I just tilted the phone slightly to make sure I got her face and the notice in frame. The contractor foreman muttered something under his breath and walked back to the truck, already dialing his office. Nancy turned to him and raised her voice. "If you touch one board, I will personally blacklist you with every HOA in the region. I have contacts." The foreman hung up and looked at me. "I am sorry, man. I cannot risk my license over this." He climbed into the truck and the crew started loading the panels back in. I watched $1,000 in labor walk away, and I knew the clock was ticking on my lease. Nancy stood there with her arms crossed, that tape measure dangling from her wrist, and said, "You should have read the rules before you started. Now you are going to learn what happens when people think they can do whatever they want in Ridgeview Estates." I stayed quiet because I had one piece of proof that would end the whole game, but I was not going to show it yet. Nancy did not know that I had a police incident number from a prior HOA trespass attempt that shows a pattern, and I was waiting for the perfect moment to deploy it. For now, I needed to figure out how to keep the project alive without getting buried in fines or losing my lease. I asked Nancy if she had a copy of the fence approval process timeline, and she laughed. "You want me to do your homework for you?" "No, you figure it out." Then she walked off, her scarf flapping behind her, leaving me standing in a yard full of survey stakes and a deadline that was about to crush me. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe for more HOA chaos and satisfying payback. The first thing I did was call the HOA management company. I got transferred 3 times before I reached someone who claimed to handle architectural reviews. I explained the situation and asked for a written confirmation that my fence application had been received and was under review. The woman on the phone sighed and said, "Let me pull the file. I will call you back." She did not call back. I waited 2 hours, then sent a follow-up email with the submission receipt attached, the one that showed the date, time, and the name of the board member who signed for it. That board member was Nancy. I grabbed my tabbed binder, the one I keep for every HOA interaction, and flipped to the submission section. There it was, March 10th, 2:17 in the afternoon, signed by Nancy Anderson, Rules Interpretation Chair. The signature was clear, the timestamp was printed by the office scanner, and the receipt had a sequential control number that matched the HOA record system. I scanned the page and uploaded it to a shared drive, just in case Nancy tried to claim it never existed. Then I called my ally, a city code enforcement officer named Marcus who had helped me before when the HOA tried to claim my trash cans violated fire codes. Marcus picked up on the second ring. "What is Nancy doing now?" he asked. I told him about the fence notice, the contractor walkout, and the 72-hour deadline. Marcus groaned. "That woman does not quit. Listen, the city does not enforce HOA rules, but I can tell you this, your fence plan meets municipal code. If she is claiming a setback violation, make her prove it with a licensed surveyor. If she cannot, file a formal complaint with the HOA management company and copy the State Real Estate Commission. That usually gets their attention." I thanked him and hung up, then opened my email and started drafting the complaint. I attached the submission receipt, the survey plat, the contractor estimate, and a screenshot of Nancy's tape measure stunt from the video I had just recorded. Before I hit send, I checked the HOA covenants one more time. Section 12, subsection 4, the Architectural Review Committee shall respond to all applications within 45 calendar days. Failure to respond constitutes approval unless the applicant is notified in writing of an extension. I had not received any extension notice. I highlighted that section, added it to the email, and sent it to the management company with a subject line that read "Formal Complaint Refense Application Violation of Response Timeline." I copied Marcus, my landlord, and my personal email for redundancy. Then I sat back and waited for the explosion. The explosion came 6 hours later in the form of a group message posted to the Ridgeview Estates neighborhood chat. Nancy had screenshot a portion of my fence plan, cropped out the survey reference and the setback measurements, and posted it with the caption "Unauthorized construction in progress." "Residents, please be aware that some homeowners believe the rules do not apply to them," the chat erupted. Within 10 minutes, I had 23 notifications, most of them from people I had never met, all agreeing that someone needed to be stopped before property values tanked. One person wrote, "If he gets away with this, what is next? Sheds? RVs?" Nancy replied immediately, "Exactly. This is why we have a rules interpretation chair. Someone has to protect the community." I stared at my phone and felt my blood pressure spike. Nancy had just launched a misinformation campaign using a cropped screenshot, and the neighborhood was eating it up. I opened the chat and posted the full uncropped fence plan with the survey overlay, the submission receipt, and a link to the covenant section about response timelines. I wrote, "For anyone interested in facts, here is the full application, submitted 6 weeks ago with no response from the committee. The covenants say that silence equals approval after 45 days. Happy to answer questions." The chat went silent for about 90 seconds, then someone replied, "Wait, so the HOA did not respond? That is on them, not him." Nancy jumped back in immediately. "The timeline rule is under review and does not apply to major structural changes." I checked the covenants again. There was no review clause. There was no exemption for major structural changes. She had just made it up. I screenshot her message, added it to my evidence file, and replied in the chat, "Nancy, can you point me to the section that says the timeline rule is under review? I cannot find it in the current covenants." She did not respond. Instead, she sent me a private message. "Stop stirring up trouble or I will escalate this to the board. You do not want that." I did not reply to her private message. Instead, I filed a records request with the HOA management company asking for all documents related to the so-called timeline rule review, any board meeting minutes discussing my fence application, and any correspondence between Nancy and the Architectural Review Committee regarding my project. The records request went out on a Friday afternoon, which meant Nancy would not see it until Monday, and by then it would be in the system with a legal response deadline. I also forwarded the cropped screenshot incident to Marcus and asked if it qualified as defamation or interference. He said it was borderline, but probably not criminal unless she kept escalating. The weekend passed with no word from the HOA, no word from the management company, and no word from Nancy. I spent Saturday restacking the fence materials in my garage to keep them dry, and I spent Sunday reviewing every document I had. The tabbed binder was now 3 inches thick with printed emails, receipts, photos, and covenant excerpts, all organized by date. My landlord called Sunday evening and asked if the fence was going to be done on time. I told him about the HOA situation and he was not happy. He said, "I do not care about HOA drama. I care about the lease terms. If that fence is not finished in 60 days, I have to move forward with termination. You signed the addendum." "I know," I said. "I am working on it." Monday morning, I woke up to an email from the management company. It was not about my records request. It was a new notice claiming that I had damaged common property and must pay immediately or be charged daily. The notice included a photo of a broken sprinkler head near the fence line and an invoice for $250 in emergency repairs. I stared at the photo. The sprinkler head was on the neighbor's side of the property line, not on common property, and I had never been near it. I pulled up my survey map and confirmed the sprinkler was 15 feet inside the neighbor's lot. This was not an HOA issue. This was Nancy scrambling to create new violations because the fence complaint was falling apart. I called the neighbor directly. His name was Ed, and he was the one who had installed the sprinkler system last year. I asked him if he knew anything about a broken sprinkler head. He said, "Yeah, my dog dug it up last week. I already fixed it myself." "Why?" I told him about the HOA invoice and he laughed. "That is insane. That sprinkler is not even on HOA property. Nancy came by last Thursday and took a bunch of photos of my yard, but she did not ask me anything. She just said she was documenting violations." I asked Ed if he would be willing to write a short statement confirming the sprinkler was his and that I had nothing to do with it. He said, "Absolutely. Nancy has been a nightmare since she got elected. Send me whatever you need." I drafted a 1-paragraph statement and Ed signed it that afternoon. I scanned it, attached it to a reply email to the management company, and wrote, "The attached statement from the property owner confirms that the sprinkler head in question is located on private property, not common property, and that the damage was caused by the owner's dog, not by any construction activity. Yai on my lot. This invoice is invalid and I will not be paying it. Please remove it from my account immediately." I copied Nancy on the email, just to watch her reaction. She replied within 5 minutes, "You are interfering with HOA enforcement and creating a hostile environment. I am recommending a formal hearing." That was fine with me. A formal hearing meant witnesses, recorded testimony, and a paper trail that could not be erased later. I replied, "I welcome a hearing. Please provide the date, time, and a list of the specific violations you intend to present. I will bring my documentation." Nancy did not reply again, but I got a calendar invite from the management company 2 hours later. Compliance hearing, Thursday at 7 in the evening, Ridgeview Estates Clubhouse Conference Room. The invite listed 3 alleged violations: unauthorized fence construction, failure to respond to a stop work order, and destruction of common property. None of those allegations were true, but I had 4 days to prepare a defense that would bury them. I spent Monday night organizing my evidence into a presentation deck. I printed photos of the survey stakes, screenshots of the group chat with timestamps, the submission receipt with Nancy's signature, Ed's sprinkler statement, and a timeline of every interaction I had with the HOA since March. I also printed a copy of the police incident report from 8 months ago, when Nancy had been caught on a doorbell camera entering another homeowner's backyard without permission to measure a shed. That homeowner had filed a police report and the officer had issued a warning. The incident number was in my files because Marcus had mentioned it during a previous conversation. I did not plan to lead with it, but I had it ready if Nancy tried to claim I was the problem. Tuesday, I got a call from a contractor I had never worked with before. He introduced himself as Ray and said he had heard through the grapevine that I was having trouble with the Ridgeview HOA. "I need to tell you something," he said. "Nancy called me last month and told me not to take any jobs in Ridgeview if your name came up. She said you were a problem resident and that anyone who worked with you would be blacklisted from future HOA projects." I did not think much of it at the time, but now I am hearing she is doing this to multiple contractors. That is restraint of trade, man. You could probably sue. I asked Ray if he would be willing to testify or provide a written statement. He hesitated, then said, "I will think about it." I do not want to burn bridges, but what she is doing is not right. I thanked him and added his information to my notes. Even if Ray did not testify, his call confirmed what I already suspected. Nancy was not just enforcing rules, she was running a harassment campaign. I forwarded the information to Marcus and asked if it qualified as tortious interference. He said it might, but I would need more than one contractor to make it stick. I started reaching out to every contractor I had contacted in the past 2 months, asking if Nancy had called them. By Wednesday afternoon, I had 3 more confirmations. One guy said Nancy had threatened to report him to the state licensing board if he worked with me. Another said she had sent him a copy of the cropped fence plan screenshot and claimed I was building illegally. A third said Nancy had called his boss directly and said I was under investigation for code violations. I compiled all the contractor statements into a single document and labeled it Exhibit C, Evidence of Third-Party Interference. My evidence packet was now over 50 pages. I burned it to a thumb drive, printed 2 full copies, and packed everything into a leather portfolio along with my tabbed binder. Thursday morning, I got one more email from Nancy. It was short and brutal. You have one last chance to withdraw your application and avoid the hearing. If you proceed, I will make sure every violation on your property is documented and enforced. This is your final warning. I replied with a single sentence, see you at 7. The hearing started exactly on time. The clubhouse conference room was set up like a courtroom, with a long table at the front for the board members and rows of chairs for residents. Nancy sat at the center of the board table, flanked by 2 other board members I had never met. About a dozen residents filled the chairs, including Ed, Marcus in plain clothes, and the passerby who had recorded the tape measure confrontation. Nancy opened the meeting by reading the 3 alleged violations and asking if I wanted to make a statement. I said yes I do, and I would like to submit evidence. She frowned but nodded. I walked to the front and handed each board member a copy of my evidence packet. I started with the submission receipt. On March 10th, I submitted a complete fence application to the Architectural Review Committee. This receipt, signed by Nancy Anderson, confirms the submission. Under Section 12, Subsection 4 of the Covenants, the committee has 45 days to respond. That deadline passed on April 24th. I received no response, no extension request, and no written denial. Under the covenants, my application is approved. Nancy interrupted. The timeline rule does not apply to major structural projects. I pulled out my second exhibit. Nancy, you posted this statement in the neighborhood group chat on Friday. You claimed the timeline rule is under review. I submitted a records request for any documentation of that review. The management company confirmed there is no such review in progress. You made it up. The room went silent. One of the other board members, a man in his 60s with reading glasses, leaned forward and said, Nancy, is that true? Nancy's face flushed. The rule is ambiguous, and I was interpreting it in the community's best interest. I did not let her finish. I pulled out the third exhibit. This is a statement from Ed Martinez, the homeowner whose property borders mine. He confirms that the sprinkler head in your invoice photo is located on his private property, not common property, and that the damage was caused by his dog. Your invoice is fraudulent. Nancy stood up, her chair scraping loudly. I was acting on information I had at the time. That is not fraud. That is an error. I moved to the fourth exhibit before she could recover. This is Exhibit C, statements from 4 contractors who confirm that you called them and told them not to work with me. One contractor says you threatened to report him to the state licensing board. Another says you sent him a cropped, misleading version of my fence plan. That is tortious interference and defamation. The room erupted. Residents started shouting questions. The board members were flipping through the evidence packet, and Nancy was standing at the table with her fists clenched. The older board member held up his hand. Everyone, please, let him finish. I pulled out the final exhibit. This is a police incident report from August of last year. Nancy was caught on camera entering another resident's property without permission to measure a shed. The officer issued a warning for trespassing. This establishes a pattern of behavior. I am not the problem. Nancy is. I stayed calm because I had one piece of proof that would end the whole game, and I was about to deploy it. I pulled out my phone, opened the video file from the contractor confrontation, and said I also have video evidence from Monday morning. Nancy told my contractor that she would blacklist him and that she had already sent a violation notice, even though I had not started construction yet. She admitted on camera that she was acting preemptively to stop my project. I connected my phone to the TV screen in the conference room using the HDMI cable the management company kept on the table. The video played in full. Nancy's voice boomed through the speakers. I will make sure the vendor sees this. I have all day, and so does my fine meter. I can put you on the agenda and keep you there. The camera caught her snapping the tape measure, the contractor's nervous glances, and the passerby recording in the background. When the video ended, I looked at Nancy and said, "You told me you could put me on the agenda and keep me there." That was a threat, not enforcement. The board member with the reading glasses looked at Nancy and said, "Nancy, this is unacceptable. We need to recess and discuss this privately." Nancy tried to interrupt and the meeting votes anyway. The board member called for a motion to suspend the hearing and review the evidence. Another board member seconded. The vote passed 3-0, with Nancy abstaining. The residents in the audience started clapping. Nancy grabbed her tape measure and her portfolio and stormed out of the room, her scarf flapping behind her. The board member with the glasses looked at me and said, "We will follow up with you within 48 hours. Thank you for your thoroughness." I packed up my materials and walked out into the parking lot, where Marcus was waiting by his truck. "That was the most organized takedown I have ever seen," he said. "You buried her." The follow-up came Thursday night at 11. The management company sent an email to the entire board and copied me. The email confirmed that my fence application was approved retroactively as of April 24th, that all fines and invoices related to the project were voided, and that the complaint filed by Nancy Anderson was dismissed without merit. The email also said that the board was launching an internal review of Nancy's conduct and that she had been placed on administrative leave from the rules interpretation chair position pending the outcome. I forwarded the email to my landlord, the contractors, and Marcus. Then I opened a beer and sat on my back porch, looking at the fence materials still stacked in the garage. Friday morning, I got a text from Ray, the contractor who had called me earlier in the week. He said, "I heard what happened at the hearing. If you still need a crew, I can start Monday. No blacklist is going to stop me now." I hired him on the spot. The crew showed up Monday at 8 and had the first section of fence posts set by noon. Nancy did not show up. She did not call. She did not send any messages. But on Tuesday afternoon, I got an email from the HOA attorney, not the management company. The email said that the board had completed its review and that Nancy had resigned from her position effective immediately. The attorney also said that the board was implementing new policies to prevent future abuse of the enforcement process, including mandatory response timelines and third-party review of all fines over $100. The fence was finished 2 weeks later, 3 days before my lease deadline. The final inspection passed without issues. Marcus stopped by the day after the inspection and took a photo of the finished fence for his own records. He said, "You know what the best part of this is? Nancy thought she could rewrite the rules on the fly, and nobody would call her on it. But you had every receipt, every timestamp, every signature. She never stood a chance." I told him about the updated survey that had been on file with the HOA since March, but Nancy had ignored it to keep the pressure on. Marcus shook his head. That is the thing about people like Nancy. They get so locked into their own version of reality that they stop checking the facts, and that is always when they fall apart. The real payoff came in the mail 4 weeks later. I got a check from the HOA for $675, which was a refund of fees that hits the ledger like a slap. The check included the original application fee, the bogus sprinkler invoice, and a $100 administrative fee for the time I spent responding to invalid notices. The letter attached to the check said that the refund was part of a settlement agreement and that the board had formally apologized for the way my application was handled. I deposited the check the same day and sent a copy of the receipt to my landlord as proof that the entire situation had been resolved in my favor. The neighborhood group chat was quieter after that. A few residents posted supportive messages saying they were glad the process had been fixed. One person wrote, "I have been dealing with Nancy for 3 years and she pulled the same stuff on me. I just did not have the energy to fight it. Thank you for standing up." Another person said, "This is what happens when one person thinks they are the rules instead of just enforcing them." Nancy never posted again. I heard through Ed that she moved out of Ridgeview Estates about 6 months later. He said she sold her house quietly and did not tell anyone where she was going. The new rules chair is a retired paralegal who actually reads the covenants before making decisions. So far, no drama. The funny thing is, the moment that really sealed Nancy's fate was not the hearing or the video or even the contractor statements. It was the boomerang. Early in the conflict, she had told me, "I can put you on the agenda and keep you there," and she meant it as a power move. But when I played that line back to the board in context with all the evidence, it became proof of her intent. She was not enforcing rules. She was weaponizing the process to punish someone she did not like. And once the board saw that, they could not ignore it. Karen's timeline is proven false with timestamps, and the HOA drops the case to avoid a public records mess. That is exactly what happened. I still see the metal tape measure with the bright red latch sometimes when I am organizing my garage. I kept it as a reminder that the most dangerous tools in an HOA fight are not lawyers or fines or meetings. They are receipts, timestamps, and a calm willingness to let someone dig their own hole while you document every shovel of dirt. Nancy thought she could bury me with paperwork and intimidation, but she forgot that I work in shipping, where the whole job is tracking who signed what and when. Every piece of evidence I used against her came from her own actions, her own signatures, her own words. She built the case against herself. I just organized it into a binder and handed it to the board. The fence still stands, solid and level, exactly where the survey said it should be. The contractor crew did a perfect job, and Ray told me later that 3 other Ridgeview residents hired him after seeing my project. The HOA tried to blacklist him, and now he has more business than he can handle. That is the kind of karma that makes the whole fight worth it. Nancy wanted to control everything, but in the end, she lost her position, her credibility, and her ability to terrorize the neighborhood. And I got a fence, a refund, and the satisfaction of knowing that the next time someone tries to abuse the rules, there is a paper trail that shows exactly what happens when you do. Thanks for watching, and I appreciate you being here.